but I'll just kick things off. The United States Coast Guard is a military, multi-mission maritime service within the Department of Homeland Security. As the Command Center Chief for 17th District, I'm responsible for search and rescue in the region, and I plan on sharing how we use a variety of resources, planning, and partnerships to execute the mission. As for my background, I am a 2012 United States Coast Guard Academy graduate. Following graduation, I was assigned to the Coast Guard cutter Sherman, homeported in San Diego, California, where we did patrols in the Eastern Pacific, so down south off Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, and then our other patrols were conducted in the Bering. So as an ensign, I experienced the Bering firsthand, the weather, the terrain, and it was my first experience in that environment. Following that tour, I was assigned to Patrol Forces Southwest Asia, which is in Manama, Bahrain, where I served as the executive officer for 6 110-foot patrol boats, where we patrolled the Arabian Gulf in support of Navy's 5th Fleet. Following that tour, I was assigned back to the lower 48 in Santa Barbara, California, as the commanding officer of an 87-foot patrol boat, where we conducted some of our primary missions of search and rescue, fisheries enforcement, drug and alien and migrant interdiction. Following that tour, I went on to pursue graduate school at Pepperdine University, where I obtained my master's in business administration. Following that tour, I did my payback in base Los Angeles Long Beach as the comptroller and base operations department head. And then I arrived in Juneau, Alaska in 2022, and it has been an amazing tour, and I'm learning every day. For the purposes of this presentation, I plan to take broad strokes, and then as we continue throughout the presentation to get more specific. I intend on speaking on our assets, search and rescue responsibilities, partnerships, cases over the last few years, and then specifically, I'm going to provide a few search and rescue cases conducted in the vicinity of the Bering Strait region. So the 17th District, one of the largest Coast Guard districts, has roughly 2,500 active duty members, reservists, auxiliaries, civilians to support operations in Alaska. The area of responsibility encompasses over 3.8 million square miles and over 44,000 miles of coastline. Now, if you look closely at the illustration, you'll see that red outline. Basically, everything inside that outline, particularly in the maritime domain, Coast Guard District 17 owns. Now, later on in the presentation, I'll get into specifics and how we work with our partners to achieve our goals and, at the end of the day, serve the American public. When it comes to 17th District assets, I usually like to start with presence creates an increased demand on the services we provide, especially in the operational mission sets of search and rescue. As you can see, as far as assets, we are heavily concentrated in Southeast Alaska and South Central. The obvious is we have limited assets or no assets in Western Alaska and North. We achieve access and coverage with our mobile command and control. I like to refer to this expeditionary in nature. That is accomplished with coupled cutter and helicopters, forward deployed helicopters, and highly efficient fixed-wing aircrafts. Activity drives or demands a Coast Guard presence. Being expeditionary in nature, District 17 prefers to move capability and capacity to where action and demand takes us. Now, if I look specifically or speak to the assets, we have two sectors, Sector Southeast Alaska and Sector Western Alaska and U.S. Arctic. Each is managed by a captain in 06, and they basically have 5 main authorities. They have Search and Rescue Mission Coordinator, Federal On-Scene Coordinator, Officer in Charge of Marine Inspection, Federal Maritime Security Coordinator, and Captain of the Port Authority. We have 2 air stations, one air station in Sitka and the other air station in Kodiak. Specifically on Kodiak, we have 6 MH-60s. We have 5 C-130 fixed-wing aircrafts. Now, we used to have MH-65s. We no longer have those. Those have transitioned out of the AOR, And in the next year or two, we anticipate having 3 additional MH-60s at Air Station Kodiak. Now, there's a lot of stars on this presentation, but if you look at the black stars with the yellow outline, those represent our forward operating sites. Those are not year-round, those are seasonal, but we have forward operating sites in Coal Bay, which is currently manned. We have a forward operating site in St. Paul, which is currently not manned and not fully mission capable, as there is current construction and contracting for housing and the hangar. And then lastly, which you're probably most familiar with, is we have a forward operating site in Kotzebue. The obvious question that I would expect in the audience is, why doesn't the Coast Guard station assets in Kotzebue year round? And I'm not the resource allocation expert, but I can speak to it briefly. What I can tell you is that we balance the resources and personnel we do have to meet seasonal demands throughout the state, including Coal Bay, Kotzebue, and others. Coast Guard cutters and land-based units also make regular visits above the Arctic Circle, supporting search and rescue and the other 10 Coast Guard missions. We are also fortunate to work alongside the Air Force, Alaska State Troopers, and other organizations to meet our shared objective of saving lives. And later in the presentation, I'll speak specifically to our partnerships. What's not depicted here is that we maintain a persistent presence in the Bering with a major cutter. That cutter could either be the Alex Haley, which is home ported in Kodiak, or we have national security cutters that enter our area from all over the world, primarily from Alameda or Hawaii. Other assets we have in our area is we have 3 fast response cutters that are home ported in Ketchikan, although they do patrol throughout the entire AOR. Currently, we have the Bailey Barca, which is in Bristol Bay. We have 4 225 buoy tenders. We have 3 110-foot patrol boats. We have 2 87-foot patrol boats, and we have 3 stations. Now more to my bread and butter of search and rescue. SAR coordination includes cooperation with 10 separate rescue coordination centers, as well as tribal and local entities. We also maintain aeronautical search and rescue responsibilities, and that aeronautical responsibility is in Southeast Alaska, and then pretty much in the middle of the Alaska Peninsula, all throughout the Aleutian chain. We work closely with our partners, with the other rescue coordination centers. For example, we routinely or annually do SAR exercises with them. Just this past year with JRCC Trenton, we did a mass rescue operation in the vicinity of Herschel Island, which is just on northern Alaska, east of the Beaufort Sea, where we utilized a cruise ship. We mobilized 60s. We mobilized the C-130. I was actually there present. It was a full-scale exercise to test our capabilities and to improve our awareness and strategy and how we can accomplish that mission if that were to happen in the future. We also do joint exercises with Tokyo. We did that this year. We did a communications exercise with the obvious that we have plenty of vessels that cross the Arctic Circle, or they conduct the Arctic route. And we did that. We also do exercises with Victoria. And then aside from exercises, we often work closely with the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center for actual cases. The demand for Coast Guard services across the region continue to grow, requiring continuous training, strategy, risk assessments, and deployments to provide the full suite of Coast Guard services to the region. For key partners, as mentioned earlier, the first partner I would like to touch base on is Alaska State Troopers. So the Alaska State Troopers, they're not just a land-based mission, they also have a maritime nexus, which typically extends out to 3 nautical miles from the baseline. We often work closely with them for search and rescue in your region, all throughout Southeast Alaska, and even in South Central. We also conduct a lot of what we call non-maritime medical transports. where you have someone at a village or a clinic needing to get to a higher level of care. So we often conduct that mission also along with the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center to get individuals to a higher level of care. Next, with the Air Force, as mentioned previously, the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center, we are constantly working with them. In the past month, we've probably done 5 to 6 actual SAR scenarios with them. 2 or 3 that come to mind. I think about 3 weeks ago, we had a scenario off St. Lawrence Island where we had a disabled 18-foot lund with 4 people on board on a hunting trip. At the same time, our air station in Kodiak diverted south of the Alaskan Peninsula for a capsized vessel, and we leveraged our relationship with the Air Force to be their primary response for that disabled 18-foot lund. For the Canada Air Force and Coast Guard, we work closely with them predominantly for Southeast Alaska. Often we get several cruise ships that come from Seattle up towards Southeast Alaska, and often there's medical evacuation requests. We also work closely with state and local entities. A good example in your area or in the vicinity of your area is, I think 2 weeks ago, there was a disabled 18-foot lund about 12 to 16 nautical miles offshore of Kotzebue. We had initiated response on our end from Air Station Kodiak, but we also worked with Kotzebue SAR, and they were able to launch one of their search and rescue boats. And in coordination with the Alaska State Troopers, we were able to locate those individuals. They were able to put them in tow and then bring them back home. And then we also work closely with North Slope Borough up in Utqiagvik. We have a strong search and rescue program. We work with them closely. We do SAR exercises. We did a tabletop exercise last year. So in a nutshell, partnerships are key across the vast response areas in and around Alaska. Most often, no singular agency has the resources or response posture to meet the challenges we face, but our partnerships and how we leverage those make our jobs more feasible and able to conduct the mission throughout our large AOR. For case overview, this is a snapshot of all the cases we had from fiscal year 19 to 23. The dots illustrate different reasons that meet our case thresholds. Some of those being medical transports, medical evacuations off of vessels, disabled vessels, distress alerts, overdue vessels, ground vessels adrift. As you can see, there's definitely a high concentration in South Central, in the Bering along the 100-fathom curve. And then if you look closely at the Bering Strait region, there's not too many in the maritime domain, but there is quite a few along the coastline and just shortly inland. What you might find interesting is the amount of land-based cases we conduct. Even though it's predominantly a state mission, we often receive calls for medical transports. And as mentioned previously, it's a team sport, and often we, the Coast Guard or the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center, are best fitted to send resources. And then the case that's right there on the Bering Strait, I will get into that here on the next slide and be more specific. But what we have done from a strategy perspective is over the years, with increased activity, we have been strategizing of how we can be more responsive. And if you are, or maybe you're not familiar with, FOS Kotzebue is one of those strategies that we employ. That started about a decade ago, and our understanding, the logistics we have in place has fully developed, and we have a significantly increased posture. We also mobilize our national security cutters towards the Arctic more later in the August, September timeframe, and so we should expect that this summer. We also have the Coast Guard cutter Healy, which should be heading that direction here in the next month. And we've also made kind of a large shift in how we conduct search and rescue in our region in particular. As I mentioned earlier, with the removal of the 65s and this transition to only MH60s, we've We've done the research and the capability, and the 60 just provided us more capability and more ability to stretch distance, time, and the ability to pick up individuals or to get to certain cases. So from a strategy perspective, we have forwarded operating sites along the coastline that we look at employing down the road to help improve our ability and capability to meet the needs of activity in that area. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, I'm diving into specific examples. I was actually on watch for this case. This happened last August 3rd to be exact. We received a call from, I believe it was the DPSO in Wales, of an individual that was from out of town who was making strange requests when he arrived to the village. And he was wanting to procure a kayak from Little Diomede. And so I think that raised the apprehension of the locals pretty quickly. And then they saw him take off in a makeshift raft. It was built of styrofoam, and his method of maneuverability was sticks. And so when we received that report, our apprehension was very high, and we immediately were, as we call it, the distress phase. We launched assets. We launched a C-130, and we had launched a 60 that was actually stationed in Kosovo at the time. The 60 arrived in the vicinity of where we received the report, conducted 2 searches, and had negative results. Upon the conclusion of the second search, they had to return for fuel. The C-130 arrived on scene and luckily found this individual within the search pattern that we designated. They were to keep eyes on this individual until we were actually able to vector a Good Sam, which is another vessel, to arrive on scene, pick up this individual, and then when the helo of the helicopter fueled up and returned to scene, they were able to hoist this individual and bring him back. I'd like to emphasize this case because, one, we wouldn't have known about it without the information, the pictures, the detail provided by Wales. The watch did a good job using our data and our tools to ascertain where the drift and current were taking this individual. It can be kind of interesting how the current moves in that area. And I think for this individual in particular, it was a miracle that we found him. He really had no plan. I think he had some mental issues at stake. But at the end of the day, it was a very good case that we're very proud of, and we got this individual back to safety. The next case I'd like to talk about is an agency assist. So this is agency assist that we worked with the Alaska State Troopers. We received a report from an individual that departed Wales. Oh, I apologize. Wrong one. Sorry, the Alaska State Troopers notified us about a party that departed Buckland in 2 boats that made a VHF call reporting they were taken on water. So receiving that report, we immediately launched a C-130 out of Air Station Kodiak. They arrived in the vicinity of that area, located the party, and then they stayed on scene to vector in local search and rescue groups. What's interesting about this case is we had the Coast Dakota Stratton operating in the area off Kotzebue. We directed the Stratton to head closer to shore. They launched their small unmanned aerial surveillance, which is sometimes known as a drone. The drone was able to get overhead and maintain situational awareness until the local search and rescue arrived on scene. So I say that with an emphasis that with the distances that we're challenged with how cases play out in our area of responsibility, we definitely find ways to get creative, and we find ways to be more strategic in how we conduct operations. In this case is a prime example of how we thought outside the box, utilized our resources accordingly, and at the end of the day, we're able to find these individuals. And lastly, before I move on to questions, I just want to say thank you for allowing me the opportunity to talk about how the Coast Guard conducts search and rescue in Alaska, and specifically the Bering Strait region. Search and rescue truly is a team sport, and we cannot be successful without our interagency partners and you, the residents of the Bering Strait. I can tell you firsthand that Good Samaritans have saved lives, and I hope this presentation gives you some insight into the variety of Coast Guard and non-Coast Guard resources we employ to help save lives. And hopefully I didn't go over it too quickly, but I am fairly open to questions, and thank you for your time.
All right, that was a good and quick overview of what you guys do in the Bering Strait region. Let's open it up. Oh, first off, I forgot to mention, we do have a caller on the line, and it is lousy to be a caller on they may have jumped off. And callers always get priority as far as questions, because it's difficult to be a caller on a Zoom call because you can't raise your hand and wave around. So I don't see them on, so we'll just proceed. Before we start asking questions, this is the time we ask the Straight Science audience to throw in the chat or do the emoji thing, if that's your vent, to give the Coast Guard a little love. It is never easy to be a public speaker. I'm sure Lieutenant Commander Kalankiewicz is just thinking, well, I couldn't wait to give a public talk tonight, and you did a great job. And so it's never easy being a public speaker. So the Straight Science audience always appreciates the speakers. And of course, you're in the Bering Strait region where we are. I think we're aligned with the Coast Guard, and we have to be creative given our logistical and financial challenges in this region. We have to be creative and we have to be strategic. So anyway, I know I've got some questions, but let's open it up. Anybody have a question for Lieutenant Commander Kalankiewicz? Go ahead, CAW.
Hi, this is Colin Warren of the Nome Nugget. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander, for your time tonight, and really enjoy those examples. My question, pertains to recent activity in the Bering Strait. The RV Norseman was, stuck in some ice and, put people on alert. And then following, the MS Westerdam was recently here, and there were reports that they were actually traveling north too, and turned back because of ice flow. And so my question is, what if worst case scenario happened there, and the cutter that is patrolling the Bering Strait is, say, 2 day sail away, and the weather does not allow for flights? What kind of communications can villages expect from the Coast Guard, and what would you recommend they do as first responders in that situation?
Thank you, Colin. I will do my best to speak to that, and please just ask again if I missed anything. So in regards to the Norseman, I think that's a good example. If anyone's not familiar, it's a research vessel that was stuck in ice. They had some damage to their rudder. Eventually, they were able to use their bow prop to align their rudder, and then they were pretty much floating with the ice for about 11 days before they were set free on the 17th of June and able to transit back to Nome, where they anchored, I think, before they pulled in. So from a response or a search and rescue perspective, when we received that initial report, we immediately moved assets. So I think the big takeaway and how we strategize here at the district is this forward-leaning mindset. Because the longer you delay, that's time loss, that's inability to maneuver around weather. It just poses more challenges. So from a search and rescue perspective, we launched an MH60 to Bethel. We launched our C-130 for overhead support, and we repositioned one of our national security cutters closer to the incident. So if the situation deteriorated, they had 20 people on board, and let's say worst case scenario, we had to remove those people, I think we were well positioned based off initial reports to conduct that mission. Being in Bethel put us at a position of roughly 2 hours or less to be able to respond. We also were leveraging our relationship with Alaska Rescue Coordination Center. as an additional responder. So we had several contingencies in place. And we also established a communication schedule. We also established that they had the proper life-saving equipment. So we definitely were forward-leaning in our asset deployment, which we would be in most scenarios similar to this. And we definitely maintain a close eye until they're eventually set free. Does that answer your question, sir?
I guess I would just like to, I appreciate knowing that, and that's very impressive, and thank you for explaining. I would just follow up wondering, if the worst case scenario happened immediately, what if they were needed rescuing immediately, and what can the villages expect for communication in that scenario? And what should, you know, I mean, I guess you can't tell people to put themselves at risk, but I mean, they probably would want to save them. When I called to Shishmaref and I told them there was a vessel out there, their first reaction was, oh, they got on the radio and they said, oh, we got to go help them. And then I assured them they were safe. And they just took the information in then, but their first reaction was to help. So what kind of communications can they expect, and what do you recommend they do if they're the first responders?
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that. So in a more large scale such as that, where we didn't have resources in the vicinity, from a response perspective, we would stand what we call an incident management team. So we would have designated individuals with certain responsibilities. And one of those responsibilities would be public affairs, in addition to communicating with the local town and villages. Because the last thing we want to do is to ask for help, but then put people in another dire situation. So in this case in particular, we worked closely with NOAA as well to get an accurate representation of what the ice was doing, where it was flowing, what the risks were. So I think what you're looking for is that communication would be very quick, and we would set the standard of what our response would look like. In addition, though, with our challenges at that time being in Air Station Kodiak, Alaska RCC has the capability to launch immediately. They have the capability to refuel in the air, something that the Coast Guard does not have that capability to do. So within a 2 to 3 hour time frame, let's say that's the concern there, I think you're going to have, whether it's the Coast Guard or the Air Force, on scene. If it's any longer than that, within the incident management team, I would expect those communications to be spread out amongst the villages and local SAR groups to ensure that there's cohesion and it's a collective team effort.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you, CAW Gnome Nugget. Emma Pate, I see your hand up. Go for it.
I'm more than to thank the Coast Guard with their history out here of 100% survival rate of when we call for SAR. I'm going to take you back to 1979, I believe. My older brother got stranded with another party for a week in between the island, 20 miles out with the ice, and that was a real good call. They came home safe and sound. They brought them in to the village, and I'm sure there's numerous calls for SCR. They were all 100%. I'm indebted to thank all of you with the previous commander. I wanted to thank you too, Lieutenant Commander. This is something that we need. We have needed all this time, and we will in the future. Things change. We had the only communications we had between the parties would be a small handheld radio. There was no LORAN. There was no global positioning system. But from that history, your success rate has been great. I wanted to thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And just to add on to that, there has been several cases, particularly whether it's a stranded hunter or someone inland, where our team at Air Station Kodiak does a miraculous job. The most recent one I can think of, I think it was within the last year. It was Wales again, where there was an individual who went on a hunting trip who didn't meet his timeline to come back. And the Alaska State Troopers were unsuccessful in finding them. They requested Coast Guard assistance. We worked with the Alaska State Troopers to build a search plan. We landed in Wales. We picked up a local search and rescue expert, and then we actually found that individual about an hour later. So, time and time again, we've had those good stories, but I like to urge, individuals, particularly in those areas where we don't have good communications, is devices such as a Garmin InReach. So most recently, the case we had off St. Lawrence Island, the way we found out that they were disabled is because they activated their Garmin InReach, and Garmin, the company, then called us. So that one gave us a position. We were able to communicate. We were able to reach out to the SAR group in St. Lawrence, because the communications challenge is real. And as you had kind of hinted, one of our other methods is using a C-130. We have the ability to drop a radio, and that is a frequent practice. But if there's anything I can urge individuals is some type of device that can notify us if you're in distress or in need of assistance. And that is Garmin InReaches, that is personal locating devices. That's kind of one of the messages I definitely want to portray here today.
All right.
So this is Emma Pate, and just to let you know, that was Benjamin Pungawi, the native village of Safunga Tribal Council president. And I have another tribal council member here who has some comments or questions.
Yes,
Okay.
I would like to
Thank
know
you,
if
Emma.
the Coast Guard can provide us with bill kit, because the shipping lanes are opening year-round now, and we have tankers awaiting for the North Slope to ice to move in case of a fuel spill that we don't have any resources. They have a major fuel spill. It might affect our sea mammals and the plants that we gather from the sea. St. Lawrence Island is the main feeding ground for different species of whales, seals, walrus, and seabirds, assortments of fish that we rely on, and the plants that we gather are being affected right now with the algae bloom. We don't want another area of an oil spill or fuel spill. We don't have resources for oil. If there's a major oil spill, fuel spill, we don't have clean. That's my comment.
Okay. No, thank you, sir, and thank you for the question. And to be completely honest, I am certainly not an expert on oil spill response. My focus is search and rescue. What I could say is that the Coast Guard would work with the responsible party to ensure necessary response actions are being taken for what has been released and to minimize any further environmental impacts. Typically, we would work in conjunction with other state and federal and local agencies if there was a discharge. But to your point, I am not the regional expert, but I am more than happy to write that question down and to give that to Ms. Sheffield to ensure she passes that to you.
Wonderful. Emma, do you have any other questions or comments?
Yes, I do. So when you mentioned the Healy would be up in this area, I think you said, what are the dates for that?
I don't have the exact dates. That's kind of at the more classified section, but I can tell you they are already in Alaska, and they anticipate being up there in the next 30 days.
Lieutenant Commander Kalankiewicz, if I'm working with the science party and I know the departure date and location, am I allowed to say that?
Yep.
Okay, so my understanding as of today is the icebreaker Healy, which we're all familiar with in the Bering Strait region, is leaving Dutch Harbor on July 1, which I believe is Monday or Tuesday. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it's July 1, if I had to put money down. And that usually takes them 2 to 3 days, depending on the speed of the ship. And they've got science on board, so I actually don't know. But if that gives you an indication, they're going to be leaving around July 1.
Okay, thanks.
And I know, okay, thank you, Emma. And if anyone at, I know you've got the whole tribal council there, which is awesome. And if anyone has further questions, just raise your hand again, Emma, and we'll get answers on that. Anna Rose, thank you for being so patient. Your hand's been up for a while. Go for it.
Hi, thank you for the presentation and appreciating hearing the other questions as well. I have a question about, from what I've read, that the U.S. Coast Guard is facing about a 3,500 personnel shortage that's leading to longstanding retention and recruitment problems. There are decisions being made to cut certain areas of service that the Coast Guard provides, but that search and rescue is being preserved, but yet it does affect redundancy. It does put strain on the workforce that exists. And meanwhile, there is a desire for increased Coast Guard presence in the Bering Strait region, with an eye towards traffic increasing in the area. And so I'm curious, in Alaska, what are the effects of the personnel Coast Guard shortage that are being seen and how that's affecting search and rescue operations? Thanks.
Yes, no, thank you. That is a great question. I think the obvious, which you definitely alluded to, is that on the HR side, there are significant shortages, not just within the Coast Guard, but the other armed services. Now, the Coast Guard has looked at its entirety, and they have expedited certain things, such as decommissioning some of our older assets to move personnel to fulfill more of the search and rescue focus. So particularly in Alaska, if I look at our search and rescue, we haven't felt an effect from a response within any of our cutters. We haven't felt it at Air Station Sitka. Where we have had some personnel assignment issues has been Air Station Kodiak. We have managed that in conjunction with how we allocate resources. But as I mentioned earlier in our presentation, with the shift that, at least if we're looking at Air Station Kodiak, with the shift of removal of the MH-65s and the addition of 360s, we're likely going to see a larger influx of those personnel. So more aviators, more technicians, more swimmers. And so when we currently have some gaps in those areas, I don't see the effect on Alaska being significant. And honestly, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I have a follow-up when you're done.
Okay, yeah. And I was just going to add that, there is a focus to keep personnel in Alaska, and amongst other areas, I'm pretty confident, don't exactly quote me on this, but Alaska was one of the places to get hit the least as far as personnel not filling job positions.
Thank you for that. And I have a question that's it's speculative, so I don't know if you can respond to it, but different scenarios are being thought through about how shipping could be increasing in the Arctic and the Bering Strait region. One of the situations is looking at political instability around the Suez Canal, and could that be diverting more traffic in the near future through Arctic waters that would pass through the Bering Strait? And coupling that with, there's not a deep well of experienced pilots for captaining ships through Arctic waters, so that there would be more ships with little experience of crew that would be being learned in real time how to navigate those waters. And just curious if you can speak to any sort of discussions that are happening in Alaska search and rescue, of monitoring that or thinking through how to deal with that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. No, thank you. That is a great question. And we do look closely from an intelligence perspective and just from a search and rescue perspective on the activity predominantly in the Bering Strait region. What I can tell you is that we have already taken action and we're continuing to pursue action to be able to respond and to have that capability down the line. So as mentioned earlier, with the removal of the 65 fleet, we now have additional 60s. And with additional 60s, we can operate more forward operating sites. And not just with one asset, potentially two assets. So if you look at the Western Alaska side and even to the north, we will have eventually, we're strategizing to have that capability along the coastline to allow us to be more prepared. Also, definitely in the last few years, and I think it's been going on longer, is our continuous presence with a national security cutter in the Bering Strait and Arctic. That is a standard practice, and you're going to see that again in conjunction with the Healy later this summer. Another third point is our current construction building of the polar security cutters. And when those come online, and I don't have a date for you, but when those come online, those missions will be in the Arctic. So from a strategy perspective, we've acted and we're continuing to look at the points that you made to better prepare ourselves for the potential of increased activity and potential incidents where Coast Guard assistance is needed or required.
Sorry about that. Anna, you were all good then with that answer?
Yes, I always want more detail, but it sounds like
Yeah, and I can expand on it a little more. Is so what the 65s were previously employed to do, and if you're not familiar, I'll try to be as clear as possible. Is we used to have a 65 helicopter on back of one of our major cutters that operated in the Bering Sea. By doing that, that provided us more capability. So if we were to stage them, let's say in the Bering Strait region, you not only have a surface asset, but you have an air asset. The issue with the 65 is their endurance, how far they can go, and their fuel. So how long they can be in the air. So my point being with the 60s is the 60s can travel farther, they can be in the air longer, and they can be on scene longer. And so this shift in strategy in having the ability to place assets at designated forward operating sites will increase our capability and our ability to respond.
All right.
Any possibility of looking at Nome to put any of those assets?
I'll be honest, I'm not the right person that makes those decisions. I'm predominantly in the search and rescue, but I can definitely take that down and ask to see if that's a feasible thing or that's something we're looking at. But I can tell you we do have the ability to stage a 60 in Nome. Now, I don't know exactly if we have a contracted hangar, but we have Bethel. I do believe Nome is a possibility for a forward operating site. Kotzebue, obviously, Utqiagvik. I believe Dillingham, maybe a potential. Some of the areas.
You're listing off all of our regional hubs, so that's good for
Yeah.
Western and Northern Alaska. And honestly, when you started with, I think you started with the question I'm probably going to get is, why are we not at Kotzebue year round? I almost fell out of the chair. I was going to say, I think the question you're going to get here from the Bering Strait region, because Nome is the hub community for the Bering Strait region, which goes from the northern Seward Peninsula, all the islands, and down into southern Norton Sound. The question I thought you were going to say is, we would be asking, why are the Coast Guard not in Nome year round? So I think that might be what Anna was also probably maybe had on her mind as well. So Emma, thanks for being patient. Go ahead.
So if I heard you right earlier in your presentation, there were 2 vessels that got caught in sea ice for a period of time, and some planning for communications, etc., for search and rescue operations were put into place. During that whole process, was anything ever set into place for a potential oil spill? If one of those vessels were to be damaged enough to spill their oil into the ocean, which this time of the year can severely impact the marine wildlife. And during this time of the year, we have a lot of spring hunting that goes on.
Yes, ma'am. So to answer your question, from my seat, I was focused on the search and rescue aspect. Now, the team entrusted on the oil spill response on the marine safety was Sector Western Alaska and U.S. Arctic. Now, I can't speak for them and how they strategize, but I know they did have plans in place and were in the discussions of the what if scenarios. But I can definitely take that question down and I can have them answer that for you.
Thank you. I look forward to the answer.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Let me check. Chris Masters, I don't know in the chat box if you're waving or if that's a hand raise. Are you good?
Yeah, I had a quick question. First
Okay.
off, I'd like to thank you, for your presence in Norton Sound and the Bering Sea. And then, my question was, do you partner or do you have any resources available for training of some of the smaller search and rescue groups, or help develop and support, some of the resources out here to, better ready some of the smaller communities in our efforts as first responders, and maybe emergency training or cold water immersion, things like that, to where some of our smaller communities have limited resources and professionals for training in those areas. And does the Coast Guard help ready some of the smaller search and rescue groups to be more active and prepared for emergency situations?
Oh, thank you, sir. Short answer is yes, sir. So the sector who has key relationships with both villages, local SAR groups, state entities, most often they have plans in place or conduct small scale exercises. Particularly in your region, I can take this back with me to verify that and follow up, but there should be plans in place, points of contact, understanding capabilities, because at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, it comes down to teamwork and working together. And if there's a misunderstanding of known capabilities, then we're already behind the curve. As far as training, we do have programs in place, but please let me write that question down and I could probably speak to some of the communities maybe you're referencing or would like to see if that is something that is in place or is going to happen in the future.
Thank you.
And this is Gay. I can thank you for that question, because that was kind of where I was going with one of mine. And that was, you had mentioned the North Slope Borough they're very fiscally robust and active region. And the Coast Guard is up there and should be, and you guys do tabletop exercises and practice for search and rescue events. And I think one of the things that for this region, we are pretty unique at sea because we have the border and got land all around, and we've got mariners traveling in many, many directions, fairly far offshore, 90 miles plus in open skiffs, and master mariners. And so we have in communities very good, knowledgeable SAR responses for maybe one community. And I know that it's been voiced to me, like, I hope the Coast Guard communicates with us at some point, because when we do have a SAR case, our own regional problem immediately, and we have to call the Coast Guard if it's a big thing. I think I was given an example of like a ship's on fire and it's got 700 people on it and it's in the Bering Strait and the Coast Guard's not here. Well, people from the islands are going to go. And they're going to launch because, as it was put to me, we try not to let anyone die here. And we understand our capabilities with our skiffs, and we won't get 700 people, but we might get 50 people. And if we get 50 people, there's going to be 50 families that are thanking God and everybody for getting their person. And so I think it was put to me, I hope the Coast Guard come and learn how we communicate, both the devices, the way we do things, and how to communicate real time in a stressful situation so that rescue can be more effective than just picking up 30 or 50 people. You guys could do your thing. Is there a way that, and maybe this is one you have to pencil down, is there a way that we can, given our unique, literally situation where we are situated, and given our incredible knowledge of the water, the currents and so forth, is there a way that, and our own resources to bear to a problem, is there a way that the Coast Guard can, whatever program you have, come to the region and maybe travel, or somehow we can have more collaboration and communication on SAR response? Might be something. As
yes, ma'am. I think
people coming and the man from Savunga, more and more situations where we're going to have big traffic, bigger accidents than just our local issues. That helps.
No, yes, ma'am. I think that's a great idea that I can say here, you can entrust me to kind of move that needle. Because, we do have challenges. If you look at Norton Sound in particular, often the Alaska State Troopers are at least the initial lead on those cases. And then sometimes we're brought into the fold. And a lot of the times, particularly if it's close to shore, the Alaska State Troopers will retain what we like to say SAR mission coordinator responsibilities, because they have the communications in that area that we don't have, or they're able to allocate resources, or they can refund individuals for their fuel. But I think you get at a really good point that I'm very interested in, is like, how do we make it more collaborative so that we're on the same page? Particularly if it's a search, as I had kind of hinted towards, is the Coast Guard uses a software system that, based on certain data inputs, it produces models on how to effectively search. Now, I think that knowledge, even from the ASTs, is not as strong as it should be. And I can imagine for the individuals at the villages in Norton Sound and in the community, that knowledge is probably it's probably non-existent. So I'm willing to take that down and look at seeing if we can do something to start to build that knowledge and build that relationship.
And thank you very much. And I'm with UAF Alaska Sea Grant, so I'm pretty easy to find here in Nome. And then Emma Pate wrote in the chat to follow, sorry, Emma, I'm just seeing this, to follow up on Chris Masters' questions in regards to training. When you follow up on my question for strategic planning processes to respond to an oil spill from a damaged vessel, can you find out what oil spill response training and supplies can be provided to the regional communities along the coast? Good question, Emma. That's back to the oil spill. And it sounds like we should maybe have one of your oil spill compartment, I don't know what the department, I don't know
team, yeah, speak to that.
Speak and do a straight science. Maybe that would be a something I know I'd be interested in. It looks like there's other people that would be very interested to, just to help educate us, and maybe we can pass information amongst ourselves to help. You know, and I'll follow that up quickly with one of the things out of the most recent situations with that research vessel was the response from, that I heard personally from several different community members from that area, that were saying, boy, if we'd been able to help plan, or if we'd been contacted, we would have immediately said, don't go in there. The knowledge, regional knowledge of the currents, as you said, because when you said that, it came into my mind, because when you said that makeshift raft guy, who was lucky, he didn't know anything about the currents, right? And so people here knew he was immediately in trouble, because you're going to go zinging around in the ice right in that location. There's a place, and people were notifying, boy, if we'd only been able to tell someone beforehand, we would have not. And then the other part of the information was, if you get a boat stuck in there, it's going to be about 2 weeks before that gyre spits them back out. And as you recall, how long was that vessel in sort of not with restricted maneuverability, I think is what they said, but it was about 2 weeks, right? So there's a lot of information in this region that I think it could be so useful for what you do to save lives, save our lives, and save lives of people that are traveling through here. I do hope in the future that is something that can be more shared, and we can learn more as well about how you go about saving lives and stuff as well. Super knowledge.
Yes, ma'am. Yep. Yes, ma'am. And I have Mike here taking the notes, so we'll definitely some of the questions asked that are not my expertise, we will certainly get those answers, and we'll provide those to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll pass those along. All right, Emma, go ahead, Savunga, and then Dean.
Hello, Lieutenant Commander. This is Ben again. And I noticed that on the FEMA mitigation plan, I don't see including you in there. So I'm going to move, upscale you on direct channel forehand before the troopers, because they're an investigative unit. Their response takes a long time. I'll give you an example. When we had a emergency situation, one of the choppers had dropped in our mountains, and our search and rescue was ready. They were waiting on word from the troopers, and they kind of wanted them to hold off until they get out here. And the team leader goes, we're going to get out there. We're going to save somebody. There's a chance that somebody survived from that thing. So sure enough, there was a young man that had a minimal, not too much of an injury. He was near death. He's bleeding, and he got saved. So we're going to move you up to the channel, direct channel. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, sir. I would still definitely recommend, depending on the location, particularly inland, that, the Alaska State Troopers are involved, because typically how we conduct business with Alaska State Troopers is they make official requests, which allows us to use resources. They also have they have certain, whether it's finance and how they can provide funding for fuel and stuff. We don't have those capabilities. And then we also rely on them heavily for planning and exact location. So I wouldn't want to eliminate that part, but most certainly if you want to also include us in that process, that is perfectly acceptable.
All right. Thank you, sir. Is that...
And
go ahead.
Ms. Shiva, I probably have time for one more question. I need to get out of here. But
okay. And it looks like that'll be Dean. And in the comments, I just wanted to say, Chris Master, I hear you, Emma, one sec. Chris Master said, I missed introducing myself. he asked the original question. I missed introducing myself, but I am representing the city and native village of Unalakleet. That's in eastern Norton Sound. And we are a community, and we as a community are interested in any training or resources available from the U.S. Coast Guard. Thank you. And there is his email. I'll send you this in the chat when we're done.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dean.
So first of all, thank you. Nice presentation, really enjoyed it. The Norseman 2 incident wasn't really a SAR response from you, but you went up on some alert status where you were watching. As one of the previous speakers had mentioned, wintertime traffic through the straits has been increasing over the last couple of years with foreign tankers and cargo ships going through. If one of those vessels become disabled, you're not really going to respond SAR-wise, but you're going to be made aware of it, I'm sure. And you have all of these details to deal with international people, mainly the Russians. So what is your response if something goes critical?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. So in a scenario like that, let's say it's a tanker going through the Bering Strait region and they're disabled. We would, I hope, we would get it notified, definitely if they're on the U.S. side. And my command center would be notified, but then we would initiate action immediately because we understand the sensitivity, the risk, and the time it takes for resources to get to that area. Because you're probably aware there's not many tug vessels that can maneuver a vessel of that size, and likely would be coming from Dutch Harbor. So as you can imagine, that transit can take a few days. So there's that concern there. But outside the search and rescue components, as I mentioned earlier or alluded to, is we would set up what we call an incident management team who would be on a tight-knit comms communication schedule to look at resources. And those resources, if it has to be, say, a tug, for example, to help maneuver that vessel so it doesn't go ashore or whatever the case may be, that has to be immediate. It comes down to that forward-leaning posture because, as you're aware and I'm aware, is distance and time is our biggest challenge.
So in this political era, do you have the capability of contacting, say, the Russian Coast Guard and finding out what they're going to do? Because I'm sure it would be quicker to get them into a Russian port. But anyways, just as long as you have something planned and you're aware of that, I'm happy.
Yep. To your point, sir, is we still maintain a relationship with the Russian border guard. We, from a search and rescue perspective, there's been no stop, even in the political arena, of maintaining that relationship. And so we have those channels. We've communicated those channels in the past year, and there's been no hiccups in that regard.
Thank you.
All righty, so that's kind of it. I'm going to drop for all of us. I'm dropping in the chat from the other computer, hopefully, some numbers and phone numbers and what to call. And my last question to Lieutenant Commander Eddie Kalankiewicz is, what is the command center? Is that the Rescue Coordination Center, or is that something completely different?
It is, and I'm sorry I didn't clarify that. So, yes, the command center is it's Joint Maritime and Aeronautical Rescue Coordination Center, also known as the JRCC. So if I went back to, I think it was the second slide, within the two sectors, we have it broken up into basically 3 search and rescue regions. So you have Sector Southeast Alaska, which manages search and rescue in Southeast extending 200 miles. Then you have Sector Western Alaska and U.S. Arctic that basically expands 200 miles and then goes past Kodiak, Middle Alaska Peninsula. Then the rest of the search and rescue responsibilities fall on the JRCC.
Okay.
My shop. Yep.
All right. So know that in that thing I just put in the chat box, it says Sector Anchorage, and nobody has told us that the name got changed. And so I'm just wondering, we are now, I guess, for all the listeners out there, we are no longer Sector Anchorage, which was much easier to say, and that's okay. We are now
Yes.
Sector Western Alaska and U.S. Arctic. Is there an
Yes.
acronym for this, or is it, we have to see it each time?
Well, we're working on it because it
How
is
about just
still,
Western and Northern Alaska or something like that, but that's interesting. So
yeah,
anyway,
because the
thank
more
you
we,
for
yeah, I
using
was
the
gonna say, the
new.
more we work on it, it's still really long. So we're trying to figure out if there's anything simple for an acronym, but that is the new title.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that
Hi.
with Western Alaska and the U.S. Arctic.
Hey,
Any other
hi.
quick, oh, go ahead, Opik. Opik is
Uh,
probably calling in from Diomede, so let's give her a little extra time. Go ahead, Opik.
Mark, I'm sorry. I was trying to figure. I'm using my cell phone this time, and I can't
Okay.
find the page where you raise your hand. Sorry about that.
No,
This is not so much of a question, but thank you, Coast Guard, for taking good care of us out here. Well, you know what you can, but so I'm thinking that, and listening to the other people, especially from our community, tribal communities, about oil spill response and also SAR. I feel that it's time to get us trained, and if you can't get us trained, it's might as well get the villages educated directly, because we will respond at some point. Um, so I think, in order, I mean, a good way to do that would to do a communications exercise, involving these communities. Once we have that set up, we would know the rightful approach. You mentioned how, we would report any incident directly to the Alaska State Troopers, but when it comes to waters, that's a different situation. We know to contact the U.S. Coast Guard, but then there's other steps that you have to take as well. You know, I think about our little village and the boaters out here, and every time a boat goes out, I hope, I'm hoping that they have uh, supplies that their boat is geared up and prepared to even have safety for themselves in that boat, which is something that I'm like, oh wow, I don't even know that. So I know that the U.S. Coast Guard does have a form that's the float plan. And is that float plan, can it be used for small boats? And I think there should be one that the boat captains fill out in our communities, that can share their information of what each of these small boats are containing, when they're going out, what type of communication will they have uh, with them being in the boats, and then with the community here. And because a lot of times the boats, when they go out there, they won't have that, what did you call that, radio equipment, inReach,
Yep, in
that
reach.
that type of communication. And if they don't have that, maybe they might have a radio, a small hand radio that they can connect if they're close enough, let's say close enough to our island, then we can communicate with them. So it's really important for them to have a plan, a float boat plan, a small one for those boat captains, to have. And then, when you're talking about key partners, your troopers, your National Guard, all those people that respond, that information should be given to uh, our communities as well, so we can, have it. Maybe you have it in a poster sense where we can put this here and we can fill in updated phone numbers, or which people we should reach. I think that needs to be put in place as well. Yep. So training, I know everybody in our villages wants training to respond to oil spill or any other incident. That still hasn't happened for Diomede. I've been requesting it for a long time. I know you mentioned something about Division of Homeland Securities. And I do know that, I know it was maybe 3 years ago that the tribe here in Diomede did sign an MOA agreement with Coeric to work on their hazardous mitigation plan, which has a lot of important information, has all the information on diamide. I know that was sent back, but then, you know, in there, if this is the same very not department, but the same source that would train our communities in a response, whether it's going to be oil spill response or SAR. So yeah, we need to hold a meeting. You know, I think specifically it would be more helpful if we held a meeting directly with the villages, you know, because like everybody knows, we're going to respond first. But that's all I had.
Yep, no, that's a great idea, and I'm just trying to think of, Lieutenant Commander said he had to run, and he is on the command center, so I don't know if, when he has to run, if it's like he has to run or if he can spend this time. But I think your comments are great. Any response to that?
Yes, no, no, thank you for the comments and the suggestions. And, you know, there's some important takeaways there with oil spill response, boating safety, and really communication. And I think on all three levels, there's rooms for an improvement. And, you know, I saw this firsthand just doing that recent case off St. Lawrence, you know, calling St. Lawrence, the SAR program manager, and, you know, all the people I talked to. So, you know, I learned then that, you know, there is some learning curves that we can overcome. So with all the three of those topics, those fall in three different realms, but I will, I have those written down and I will definitely get a response. And we'll get back to you, I promise.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope you get back to us because Gay Sheffield has she knows how to connect with the tribal communities directly. She has everybody's email addresses.
I don't know about that, but yes, we will make sure, we will try to hold Lieutenant Commander Kalankiewicz. I think he's good for it. So we'll
Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you, Opik. With that, thank you so much. And I hope that if there's a SAR, the Coast Guard's going to go rescue a Russian ship, and that would be good show of faith. I do worry. We all kind of are worried about the border, and I'm sure you're well aware and well versed in all of that. I hope nothing bad happens to Chukotkins or Russians or any of the countries traveling through, but I hope that we used to have a very much more mutual border a few years ago, and we'd like to keep it peaceful, and we're too small to be enemies, I think, this close. We're not too small, we're too close. Both of us, both the countries. Seems political. Anyway, thank you so much, and thank everyone for coming. I don't see any other last minute things, and thank you. We better let Lieutenant Commander Eddie Kalankiewicz get back to manning the command center and making sure everyone is safe on his watch. So thank you, sir. And thank you to Lieutenant Commander Mike Salerno. Lieutenant Commander Salerno, I know you're in the background there. If you want to hold, we'll let everybody go, and then maybe you and I can catch up on a couple things. I just want to double check on some things.
Yes, ma'am. Sounds good.
Okay. Awesome. With that, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time.